Cemeteries close at dusk for a reason. Not because of the dead, because of what the dark brings out in the living. Most people never think about who stays behind after the gates lock, who walks those paths alone at 2 a.m., who maintains the grounds when the world is asleep and the only sound is wind moving through headstones that have stood there longer than anyone alive can remember. These are 3 stories submitted by people who worked those shifts, people who went in skeptical and came out changed. I'll let them tell it themselves. Story 1. The Visitor. I want to start by saying I am not someone who scares easily. I spent 11 years as an overnight groundskeeper at a cemetery in a small town you've never heard of. Population maybe 800. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the cemetery sits at the edge of town where the streetlights stop and the cornfields start. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., locking the gates, checking the perimeter, making sure nobody had vandalized anything, keeping the maintenance shed stocked. Routine. Quiet. I liked it that way. The first time I noticed the visitor, it was a Tuesday in November. I was doing my perimeter walk, same route I walked every single night, when I saw a figure standing near the east section. That section is the oldest part of the grounds, stones dating back to the 1800s, mostly illegible now, the kind of area where even in daylight you watch your step. I assumed it was a mourner. People grieve on their own schedules. I'd learned not to approach unless I had to. So I watched from a distance. The figure didn't move, just stood there facing one particular headstone, arms at their sides, no flashlight, no candle, nothing. After about 10 minutes, I decided I should check. It was nearly midnight, and they'd need to leave. By the time I crossed the grounds to that section, maybe a 2-minute walk, they were gone. I checked the headstone they'd been standing in front of. Margaret Ellen Corey, 1891 to 1931. No flowers, no personal items, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. I wrote it off. People come and go. The gate had a gap in the fence on the south side that I'd been reporting to management for 6 months. Anyone could get in. The second time was the following Tuesday. Same figure, same spot, same headstone. This time I moved faster. I walked at a pace just short of running, and I crossed that cemetery in under a minute. Gone again. I stood at Margaret Corey's stone and I looked around in every direction. The cemetery's flat. No trees in that section. No mausoleums to hide behind. Open ground as far as the fence line.
There was nowhere to go that fast. I told myself it was a shadow. Moonlight through clouds. Your eyes do strange things at midnight when you're alone. The third Tuesday, I brought a flashlight and I waited. I positioned myself near the maintenance shed with a clear sight line to the east section, and I waited from 10 p.m. with the flashlight off. At 12:17 a.m., the figure appeared. Same spot, same posture, arms at sides, facing Margaret Corey's stone. I turned on the flashlight and walked directly toward them without stopping. The figure did not move as I approached. It did not turn around. It did not react at all. And then, at maybe 30 feet away, it was gone. Not like someone running, not like someone stepping behind something. Gone. Between one step and the next. I stood at that headstone for a long time that night. Then, I did something I'd never done before in 11 years. I opened the cemetery records when I got back to the shed. Margaret Ellen Corey died November 1931. Cause of death listed as unknown. She was buried alone. No husband listed, no children, no next of kin recorded. There was a note in the margin of the original ledger, handwritten, faded almost to nothing. I had to hold it under the light to read it. It said, "No one came." I called in sick the following Tuesday. I'm not proud of that, but I did. When I came back Wednesday, my supervisor mentioned that the east section gate had been found open Tuesday morning. The padlock was intact. It had not been forced. I have not seen the figure since. That was 3 years ago. I still do the perimeter walk every night. I still slow down when I reach the east section. And I have never looked up who Margaret Ellen Corey was before she came to that cemetery. Some things you decide not to know. That was Marcus. He still works the same cemetery. He asked me not to name the town. The next story comes from someone who no longer works in this industry at all. After one night, she decided she never would again.
I took the job because I needed money, and it paid well for night work. I want to be clear about that. I was not interested in cemeteries. I had no fascination with death or the paranormal. I was 26 years old, behind on rent, and a groundskeeper job that paid $18 an hour with a night differential sounded like exactly what I needed. My third week on the job, my supervisor asked me to cover a Saturday overnight alone. The regular guy called out sick. I'd done the shift with him 4 times by then. I knew the routine. I said yes. The cemetery was large, suburban, well-maintained, the kind of place with paved paths and a small office building near the entrance. Nothing rural about it. Security cameras at the entrance gate, the office, and 2 along the main path. What it did not have was cameras in the east wing. I know, east wing again. I don't know why it's always the east. My shift started at 9. By 11, I had completed 2 full walkthroughs without incident. I was in the office, watching the security monitors and eating a sandwich, when I noticed something on camera 2. Camera 2 covers the main path from the entrance down to the central section. Long, straight shot. Good lighting from the path lamps. There was a child standing in the middle of the path. A small child, maybe 5 or 6 years old from the size, wearing what looked like a white nightgown. Standing completely still in the middle of the path at 11:15 p.m. My first thought was that someone had abandoned a child. It happens. Dark thought, but it happens. I grabbed my radio and my flashlight and went out immediately. The path from the office to where the child was standing takes maybe 90 seconds at a fast walk. The path was empty. I walked the entire main path, called out, checked the side paths, used my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. I went back to the office and rewound the camera. The child had been visible on camera for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, standing in the exact same position, not moving. And then on the recording, at exactly the 4-minute 30 mark, the child turned its head. Slowly, all the way to the right, facing directly at camera 2. And then, it was gone. I watched that clip 6 times. Then I called my supervisor and told him I quit. He asked me if I was serious. I said yes. He asked me what happened. I told him to check camera 2 from that night. He called me back 40 minutes later. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "This isn't the first time something has shown up on that camera." I asked him what he meant. He said the camera had been replaced 3 times in 2 years because of what kept appearing on the footage. I asked him what kept appearing. He said, "The same child." I don't know who that child is. I don't know whose grave they were standing near. I don't know if anyone has ever tried to find out. What I do know is that my supervisor has worked that cemetery for 19 years, and he still won't walk the main path alone after dark. Donna has since moved to a different city. She asked me to mention that she has never had another experience like that one. She also asked me not to name the cemetery. I'll respect that. The last story is different from the first 2. Because whatever happened in story 1 and story 2, you can still find a way to explain it. What happened to James
cannot be explained. Not by him, not by the people who responded that night, not by anyone who has looked at the evidence since. This is James's account, exactly as he sent it. 22 years I worked that cemetery. 22 years of nights, of quiet, of doing my rounds and going home and sleeping through the day and coming back. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. This happened 14 months ago, on a Thursday in early September. Warm night, no wind, sky clear enough to see stars between the clouds. I was doing my final round of the night at around 4 a.m. when I noticed one of the grave markers had been disturbed. Not vandalized, not knocked over. Disturbed. Moved slightly, like it had been lifted and reset at an angle. The dirt around the base was loose in a way that was not consistent with settling or erosion. I crouched down to look at the name on the stone, and I stopped breathing. The name on that stone was my name. My full name, first, middle, last. I want to be precise here because I know how this sounds. This was not a common name. This was not a John Smith situation. My name is unusual, specific, the kind of name that stops people when they read it because they've never seen it before. My full name on a headstone in a cemetery I had worked for 22 years. I stood up slowly. I looked around. The cemetery was empty, silent. 4 a.m. and not a sound. I looked back at the stone. It had a birth year, 1887. It had a death year, 1931. It had my name. I took a photograph. I needed to confirm I was seeing what I was seeing. I went back to the office. I pulled the records. That stone was in our system, had been for as long as our digital records went back. Nothing unusual about it. No flags, no notes. The name on file matched exactly what I saw. I called my wife at 4:15 in the morning and I told her what I found. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "James? Your grandfather's name?" I had never known my grandfather. He died before I was born. My father never spoke about him. We had no photographs, no documents that I knew of. My grandfather's name, which I had been given without knowing the origin of it, was on a headstone in a cemetery I had worked for 22 years. And the death year on that stone was 1931, the same year as Margaret Corey from Marcus's story. I know that means nothing. I know 1931 was a year in which many people died, and the fact that two stones in two separate stories share a year is coincidence. But I have thought about it every day since. I went back to that stone the next morning in daylight. The dirt around the base had settled back completely, firm, like it had never been disturbed. I contacted the County Historical Records Office and requested documentation on the burial. They confirmed the death, the name, the year. Cause of death? Unknown. No next of kin on record. Buried alone. I retired 6 weeks later. My wife asked me why I finally decided to leave after 22 years. I told her I had found what I was supposed to find. I don't know what I meant by that, but it felt true when I said it. And it still does. 3 groundskeepers, 3 shifts they never forgot. Marcus still walks that east section every night and slows down at Margaret Corey Stone. Donna is somewhere else now, living a completely normal life and has never set foot in a cemetery since. And James retired to a house with no cemetery within 5 miles in any direction. He visits his grandfather's grave once a month now. He says it feels like the right thing to do. If you've worked a night shift in a cemetery,
or anywhere else that left you with a story you've never told, you know where to find me. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this video kept you up, subscribe. New story every Thursday. And maybe, just maybe, sleep with the light on tonight.